Scott Morrison, thanks for joining me. It must be a tough transition. You've gone from working absolutely flat out, as all Prime Ministers do, to being a backbencher. What are you doing with yourself these days?
Well, I've been enjoying becoming the member for Cook just again. I mean, it's always your first job as a Member of Parliament, your local electorate, and since the last election I've had the great opportunity to return principally to that role, and it's been a great opportunity to get around and say thank you to a lot of people, which I've enjoyed being able to do, and obviously for the family it's been wonderful to return home. This is where we love living, and we've enjoyed being back part of our community and part of our church community here as well, and that's been terrific.
Still, you always need a bit of sense of purpose in your professional life as well, I guess. It has been tough for you, hasn't it? You've been scapegoated by your own party, really. A number of your colleagues I see treating you a bit like a leper. That's got to be hard for even the toughest of people. How have you coped with that?
Oh, Andrew, I'm quite philosophical about these things, and as for senses of purpose, I mean, as I said, your first job as a Member of Parliament is your electorate, and if that's not a job you're committed to, then that's not a job you should be doing. And that was the reason I first went into politics many years ago. Right. Well, look. When you go into politics, and it's got a lot worse over the last 15 or so years of when I first went in. But you don't complain about these things. Of course, the arrows and darts come your way, and that's the nature of being in politics, and particularly in modern politics. So, look, it's just something you deal with. I've got a wonderful family. I've got a strong faith. I've got tremendous supporters, and there isn't literally a day that passes when I'm out and about where people don't pop up to me in the street and say thank you very much and for the service that I was able to provide. And I'm very grateful that I had that opportunity. It wasn't just the almost 4 years I served as Prime Minister, but almost 9 years in Cabinet itself across a range of different portfolios. And over the entire time, over the last 16 years, being able to serve a community I loved deeply here in the Shire in southern Sydney.
Well, good that you're being philosophical. Looking back at your time as Prime Minister, do you think at any stage, we should have taken a different approach or presented a different side of myself or something like that? Do you lie awake at night doing the what ifs?
No, not really. There are always things you might have done differently, but once that time is completed, I mean, you just are thankful for the opportunity that you had, Andrew. I mean, there are plenty of other people who are happy to point those things out, so, you'll have your own sort of quiet and private reflections on these things, but, you're honestly just grateful. I mean, I had a wonderful opportunity to serve my country, and I'm very pleased with what I was able to do during that time. I mean, there'll always be more things that you would like to do, but I mean, to serve in Cabinet for, as I said, almost 9 years, almost 4 years as Prime Minister. There are a few people who get such an opportunity, and I'm deeply grateful for it.
I've been impressed by how you've been carving out a new role for yourself lately. Now, you were this week in Israel explaining very powerfully why its war against Hamas was really ours too. It's a civilizational war, in my view. You were warning against the anti-Semitism here, which is shocking. Before that, you were in Taiwan, again talking up the cause of freedom, suggesting closer ties with Australia. You've also correctly linked the defence of Ukraine to our defence against the new threat from this axis of authoritarians, China, Russia and Iran coming together to really challenge the world order. Why have you thrown yourself into all this?
Well, I first spoke about what I call the arc of autocracy back when I was Prime Minister. I mean, it wasn't as fashionable a phrase back then, but I could see it then, and that was back in March of 22, I think, a speech I gave to the Lowy Institute. But that had been the impression that had been forming for some time. There are those who want to see the world order different to what it is today, and you set them out who the key candidates are. And it's, of course, the People's Republic of China and the government there. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran and the tyrannical regime in Russia. And then you can add North Korea on that to boot. they would like to see the world run very differently based on power only, and to basically set up regional hegemonic franchises where they can pretty much do and go as they please. And, as a government, we were very keen to say no to that, particularly in our own region, and be joined with wonderful partners in the United States and in Japan and in India in particular as part of the Quad. But then the AUKUS partnership I was able to put together with the United States and Great Britain. So, since losing the election and continuing to serve in the Parliament, I mean, you have the opportunity, they come your way as an ex-Prime Minister, to go and make various presentations at important forums around the world, and I've maintained that keen interest in those issues. Also maintain a pretty keen interest in the work we're doing in critical minerals and rare earths strategy, which we initiated in government, and that's frankly also part of the same agenda when it comes to critical supply chains and what that means for global security. So, just because you don't win the last election, it doesn't mean that your interest in these issues fade. When you're Prime Minister, you're working across many, many fronts. And after that time concludes, you have an opportunity to focus particularly on those that you are most passionate about.
It's weird, isn't it? I sometimes get the sense that Australia's a little bit, we're isolated and insulated as a result from what's really going on. I was seeing footage earlier this week of people in Japan doing practicing air raid alerts, huddling in shelters. At Taiwan, they do this too, people having to rush to shelters in preparation for a war that they think could be imminent. Here, we don't seem to sense quite how in the balance all this is at the moment.
Well, I think that's true, but would you really want it differently for our kids and for the peace of our communities and our suburbs and towns? But I think there is that greater reality that dawns on you when you're in those places, and I've been in most of them. I mean, just when I was with Boris in Israel just a few days ago, we're on a 15-second warning for rockets coming out of Gaza, where we were at the kibbutz that was so devastatingly attacked, and the atrocities that were committed there. And that goes with life even during normal times in places like that. Up in Taiwan, it was very similar. I was there on their National Day, and I just couldn't help but thinking as I sat there and I looked at the parade that was going past, and I looked around the city, and it is the proximity of the mainland China, which threatens Taiwan on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. You can't escape it. So, I give thanks that we live in a country where those sorts of threats aren't as ever present. But, it also means that sometimes we fail to appreciate, the reality of some of those circumstances overseas, and particularly in Israel. I mean, what occurred on the 7th of October was an evil that eclipsed even ISIS. The premeditation of the planning of the atrocities that were committed on over 1,400 innocent Israelis, including babies. I mean, there was a 9-month-old baby that was taken hostage after their parents were cold-blooded murdered in their home. There were women who were scalped, women who were raped. The people's hands were tied as they were murdered, and their bodies desecrated. I mean, this was the most heinous of crimes. And what was most chilling, as I was listening to the accounts and being shown where these things took place, was the premeditation, the organisation, the planning, the drilling that would have occurred in order to go and commit these atrocities, which came in waves and waves and waves. I mean, the terror that must have been felt by those innocents, I can't describe it. And it was a very overwhelming thing to be able to be there. I'm pleased I went, though, because I think it's important that we understand what's happening in the Middle East right now happened because of Hamas's evil acts, and they cannot go unaddressed because they will happen again if they go unaddressed. That's the key point. There can be no moral equivalency drawn between Israel's self-defence and Hamas's acts of atrocity.
And of course, a bloodlust like that, a worldview like that, does not stop with the destruction of Israel if they could achieve that. This is a problem for all Western civilization, in my view. But, you know, despite...
Well, if they behead their babies, they'll behead others' babies too.
Absolutely, but they draw a line. You know, only these people come off it. But, you know, what disturbs me,
right,
like, some of the horrors you're talking about, anyone can see if they chose to. It's on the internet now. And yet you see in Australia this anti-Semitism, this lack of sympathy for what happened, and this rabid anti-Semitism like I've never seen before in this country. And I haven't heard the Prime Minister take a really firm stand against it, by the way. What would you have done? What should he do?
Well, I'll speak for what I have done, and it would have been no different had I been Prime Minister. I have a long-standing relationship with the Jewish community in this country, and I've enjoyed that relationship greatly, and I grieve with them. I just grieve with them and feel as best as I can what they must be going through. I mean, to in your own country, to have people chanting these anti-Semitic slogans. I mean, on the front page of the Australian today, Holocaust survivors for the first time feeling the need to speak out in the way they have. And when I was reading that article earlier today, that experiencing this makes them relive the terrible atrocities they lived through, and that this is occurring in Australia, but not just here. I saw it when I was in the UK as well, and arguably even worse. But this is something that should never take place in Australia. You know, when people talk about the fact that they've been to Holocaust museums and that they light candles and Kristallnachts today, and they say never again, but you can't say that if you're not standing today and seeking to support Israel in how they deal with this terrible, the worst single day of atrocity committed against the people of Israel since the Holocaust. I mean, when you let that fact sink in, then it is just unimaginable that people in Australia would be saying what they're saying. It is just, it is a shame. It is a great shame.
If you were Prime Minister, would you have gone to Israel?
If I had, well, probably, I think I would. I had the opportunity to go on the weekend, just purely because there was an opportunity to do so. I was in London, and I was catching up with Boris. As you know, we're good friends, so we went through quite a lot together over the period in time we were both Prime Ministers, AUKUS being a highlight of that, but there was many other things. So we were just catching up, and he invited me to come along on what was, you know, a planned visit at that point, and I was very pleased to do so. Now, I'm not going to sit here and second guess what the Prime Minister should be doing now. It's up to him to make those judgments. And I've sought since the election not to engage in that sort of commentary wherever I could avoid it, unless I've been directly attacked, which has happened on more than one occasion. But I know what I would do, and I think that Jewish Australians need to know that their cause is a right one, given the atrocities committed against them. So often when you hear of, you know, when as Prime Minister, when Muslims were slain in Christchurch, you know, we reached out to that community, as we should, and the Jewish community were one of the first to do that. There were no buts. When 9/11 happened, there were no buts as to, you know, expressing our great sorrow and saying that we stood with them. There was no but at the end of that phrase. But with the Jewish community, there always seems to be a but. And I don't understand.
Always. No, I totally agree with you there. Now, I've suggested on this show and in my newspaper columns yesterday that with your experience, you would make a good foreign affairs spokesman for the opposition, like Bill Hayden was for Bob Hawke after he lost his leadership of the Labor Party. Have you totally ruled out staying in politics beyond the next election?
I have expressed nothing beyond what I'm doing in this term of Parliament, Andrew, and that remains the case. We're about mid-term, and obviously, decisions are going to have to be made at some point in time. But I haven't expressed any statement beyond this term of Parliament, and I'm there. I was elected at the last election, and I've been serving my electorate since then. I've had, as we were already discussing, a great opportunity to serve, but more than most, in fact, and that's something I'm thankful for, and I'm being as encouraging and supportive of Peter and the team as I possibly can be, Simon included. See, the things I've been able to say and places I've been able to go have been afforded by the role I now have, and I can speak my mind on these things very clearly. I mean, when I've given speeches on the way that the one China policy works in Taiwan, or where I've been in Israel, they were my views. I don't speak on behalf of the opposition, but I know that there's a very heavy overlap. But these are comments that I make off my own bat, based on my own experience. But if I could just, if you don't mind, Andrew,
but if the opportunity came up to serve
about Israel, sorry. Well, I know I haven't offered myself
if the opportunity came up
to return to the front bench, and I'm not offering myself up to that role. The party has got some great people there serving in the Parliament, and I look forward to them all getting the opportunities that I have had. And I'm not offering myself a role on the front bench, no. But I appreciate
that wasn't the question, really. But you're too much of the politician, I guess. But my point is, I don't know that there's quite enough experience on the front bench. I think the opposition's doing very well over the last few months. But, they've got people with ministerial experience, very important ministerial experience, Keith Pitt, Matt Canavan, yourself sitting on the front bench, back bench. This doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
Well, I can only speak in my own case, and that's, I talk to Peter pretty regularly, actually, and I'm able to offer my support and experience right across the team, and do so very regularly. I don't do it publicly. I do it just directly with the team, and many come and see me and seek my counsel, and I'm very happy to provide it. But that's something that I do behind the scenes. As for others, it's the leaders' jobs to do that. But I point out that between Peter and Susan Lee in particular, they're two of our most experienced, that's probably one of our most experienced leadership teams we've had, particularly in opposition. I mean, they've both been there well over 20 years. They've both served in cabinet positions and in multiple cabinet positions. And so, I think they lead from great experience.
Depth of batting. No, that's true.
Well, they're matters for the leader of the Liberal Party, not me.
You can't run the government just by yourself. Yeah,
well, you can't, and I think there is a good team.
Well, it could be better. Always could be better. The Liberals under Peter Dutton have actually done what, well, as you know, I said at the time you should have done more of. Culture wars. He did fight The Voice, for instance. Next, I think, is going to be taking on global warming extremism, or at least certainly hope that. There's hurting jobs, wasting billions, frightening off investments, frightening off children, insulting our intelligence. Anthony Albanese today, though, is right on board all this stuff, tipping in another $350 million into something called the Pacific Climate Infrastructure Financing Partnership. Says he's going to announce more spending on top of that. I mean, global warming, it's really now a cargo cult, isn't it? And surely it's time to start having a serious debate about this fear-mongering and the price of it.
Well, I never thought that discussion of that issue should be a forum for frightening children. I take a very optimistic view and a very practical view, and it's probably not one that you and I completely share, Andrew, but it's one that I always saw this as an economic challenge principally, and how we were going to ensure that people were going to continue to invest in Australia, to ensure that Australia could continue to perform strongly as an economy, and to the extent that transitions were taking place in the energy sector, and they're happening all around the world. Australia can't stick its head in the sand and pretend that's not happening, and that capital markets aren't functioning like they are, and that the risks to Australia as an economy, if we were to go down the path some would suggest, would basically leave Australia pretty isolated and stranded. I didn't want to see that happen. So we engaged in a positive agenda, but I've never believed in the doomsday sort of view about these things. I have great faith and confidence in the ingenuity of human beings to be able to deal with these and all challenges. I mean, the conference I was at with so many others just recently in London at the ARC conference, I mean, that was the point. The point is, there are all sorts of challenges that happened over generations, and we are quite accomplished at dealing with them and offering people hope. I mean, that's I think one of the great disbenefits of how the climate debate has occurred in this country and all around the world. It's a scorched earth view, and I just don't share that view. I believe we can deal with it, and I believe Australia can prosper through it.
Yeah, but you can't actually do a cost-benefit analysis until you start questioning the scenarios that are posited about, we'll all die, humanity on the brink. This idiot that I had on the show last night saying that his daughter's life wouldn't be the same and he was going to kill himself, starve himself to death in front of Parliament House. I mean, this apocalyptic vision
they're not
to be
things
challenged in the first place. No, I know, but you've got to challenge them.
They're not things that we ever... None of that was ever, informing our policies, and I don't think that should. And I think there's plenty of evidence out there to do exactly as what you're saying. But the issue here is what you do about it, and how you structure your economy, and how you attract capital, and how you continue to innovate. That's what Australia's always done well on. And I think that's what Western civilization has always done very well. That's why, I think we should be giving our kids hope and positivity about these things, and celebrating what can be achieved. I mean, I gave another speech I gave, which was at the Oxford Union back in June. I was just talking about how we've got to stop talking Western civilization down. I mean, we should be very. I mean, no civilization is without its dark spots, but equally that shouldn't be done without acknowledging the extraordinary advances and progress we've been able to make. And the great thing about Western society and Western civilization is we're a reforming society. We're able to, acknowledge mistakes. We're able to acknowledge when we get things wrong, and we're able to reform and improve. And I think that's one of the great things about what happens in Western democracy. I mean, you're not going to get people saying that up in the arc of autocracy from China across to Iran and Russia, and certainly not in North Korea. And that is, I think, the positive expression of liberty and freedom, and how what I particularly liked about the conference last week in the UK. It wasn't a freedom which sort of said you can do whatever you want. Freedom always has limitations. And the message was one of responsible freedom, where citizens are happy to be able to lift themselves in part for a stronger community and a stronger society. That's what Western civilization is. And happy to celebrate that any day of the week. And that's what, certainly our party has always sought to strive to promote.
Look, maybe that's a good place to end, actually. Thank you so much indeed for your time, Scott Morrison. Really appreciate it.